Water was pouring into my yard like someone had opened a dam. I ran outside in the rain and saw the muddy stream rushing straight across my grass, heading for my garden beds. My fence was already half underwater. The wooden posts were shaking. As the current pushed harder, then I saw where it was coming from. A brand new metal drainage pipe had been pushed under the HOA fence behind my property, and that pipe was dumping all the stormwater from the neighborhood directly into my land. Walked closer through the mud and rain. The pipe was wide, maybe a foot across. Water blasted out of it like a fire hose. My neighbor Jake ran over from next door. "Man, you seeing this?" he said, staring at the pipe. "I'm seeing it," I said quietly. He pointed toward the hill above us where the HOA clubhouse sat. They just installed a new drainage system last week. Said it was for flood control. "Yeah," I muttered, watching the water chew through my lawn. Looks like their flood control became my flood problem. Within 10 minutes, my backyard looked like a swamp. My small shed had water around the base. The vegetable beds my daughter planted last spring were already disappearing under brown water. Jake shook his head. "They didn't even ask you?" "Nope." I pulled out my phone and started recording. The pipe, the flooding, the HOA fence behind it, because something about this smelled wrong, and I already had a feeling who was behind it. Karen, Linda Crawford, HOA president for the last 3 years, but nobody in the neighborhood called her that. To everyone, she was just Karen, the kind who walked around with a clipboard like she owned the entire zip code. Last summer, she tried to fine me for improper grass height. My grass was literally 1 inch taller than the HOA rule. Another time, she sent a warning letter because my American flagpole was too visible from the street. Too visible. Yeah, that actually made it into the letter. I walked up the hill through the rain toward the clubhouse. The parking lot lights were on, and a few people were standing under the awning watching the storm. Karen stood right in the middle of them, holding an umbrella like she was hosting a garden party. When she saw me walking up covered in mud, she smiled. That smile told me everything. "Well," she said loudly, making sure the others heard, "if it isn't our non-compliant neighbor—" I didn't raise my voice. "I just pointed back down the hill. You ran a drainage pipe into my yard." She tilted her head like she was confused. "No. We installed a community flood system. It's flooding my property." Karen shrugged under the umbrella. "Your land is the lowest point," she said casually. "Water flows downhill. That's basic science." A couple of HOA board members chuckled behind her. I stared at her for a few seconds. "You didn't have permission." She leaned closer. "We don't need permission," she whispered. "The HOA board approved it. That pipe crosses my property line." Karen gave a fake little laugh. "Oh, please. You don't actually own that much land." Now that made me smile, because that sentence told me something very important. Karen hadn't checked the records. Behind us, lightning flashed across the sky. Rain hammered the clubhouse roof while water continued pouring into my yard below. Karen turned to the others and waved dismissively. "If you have a complaint," she said loudly, "submit it to the HOA in writing like everyone else." Then she leaned close again and added quietly, "Or you can just enjoy your new lake." Some of the board members laughed. I stood there a moment longer, letting them laugh. Because while Karen thought she had just solved her neighborhood flooding problem, she had no idea where that drainage pipe actually sat, and more importantly, she had no idea who originally designed the land around that clubhouse. I walked back down the hill without saying another word. Jake was still standing by the pipe watching the water pour out. "So what now?" he asked. I looked at the stream, tearing through my yard, then up toward the bright lights of the HOA clubhouse sitting safely on the hill. "They think this land is just a ditch," I said. Jake crossed his arms. "Isn't it?" I shook my head slowly. "No." Another flash of lightning lit up the yard, because what Karen didn't know yet was that 20 years ago, before that clubhouse even existed, I had built something under this property. And that old system still worked perfectly. Jake looked at me. What kind of system? I smiled. The kind that can move a lot of water. I pointed up the hill toward the HOA building glowing in the rain. Both directions. Water exploded into my yard like someone had turned a river loose. Mud, leaves, trash, everything rushed across my grass. Within minutes, my backyard looked like a swamp. The wooden fence behind my shed was shaking from the pressure of the water. Ran toward the back and saw the source. A huge metal drainage pipe had been pushed under the HOA fence. Water blasted out of it like a fire hose. Straight into my property. My neighbor Jake came running over in the rain. Dude! What the hell? Is that? I pointed at the pipe. That's the HOA solving their flooding problem. Water kept pouring out, flooding my garden beds. My daughter's small pumpkin patch was already disappearing under brown water. Jake looked up the hill toward the big HOA clubhouse sitting above the neighborhood. They installed a new drainage system this week, he said. Said it would. Protect the community. I laughed once. Yeah, looks like they protected themselves. I pulled out my phone and started recording everything. The pipe, the fence, the flooding yard. Because I already knew who was behind this. Karen Linda Crawford, HOA president. The woman who acted like the entire neighborhood belonged to her. Last year, she tried to fine me because my truck stayed in the driveway overnight. Another time she taped a notice to my door saying my American flagpole was too tall for community standards. She loved rules, as long as they only applied to other people. I walked up the hill through the rain toward the clubhouse parking lot. Karen stood there under a big umbrella with 2 HOA board members watching the storm like it was entertainment. When she saw me walking up soaked in mud, she smiled. Well, she said loudly, if it isn't our problem resident? I pointed down the hill. You ran a drainage pipe into my yard. Karen didn't even look. We installed a community flood system. It's flooding my property, she shrugged. Your land is the lowest point, she said calmly. Water flows downhill. Some of the board members laughed. I stepped closer. You didn't ask permission. Karen leaned toward me and lowered her voice. We don't need permission. Then she added something that made the others laugh again. Honestly, your yard was ugly anyway. Now it's a pond. They all chuckled like it was the funniest thing in the world. I stood there quietly for a moment. You're sure about this? I asked. Karen rolled her eyes. If you don't like it, file a complaint with the HOA. Then she turned away like the conversation was over. Enjoy the lake, she said. I walked back down the hill without saying another word. Jake was still standing by the pipe watching the water destroy my yard. So what now? He asked. I looked at the rushing water. Then up at the big clubhouse sitting above the hill. Karen thought she had solved the neighborhood's flooding problem, but she had made one huge mistake. She assumed my land was just empty ground. It wasn't. 20. Years ago, before the HOA even existed, the county hired my company to build the original storm drainage for this entire area. Back when I worked as a civil contractor, Jake frowned when I told him that. Wait, you built the drainage? Part of it, I said. I pointed at the ground near the fence where the pipe was dumping water. Right under this yard, there's an old emergency overflow line. Jake blinked. What does that mean? I smiled. Slightly. It means this yard isn't the end of the system. Then where does it go? I pointed straight up the hill, to the place that was supposed to handle overflow. Jake followed my finger toward the large building with the bright lights. The clubhouse? Yep. His eyes got wide. You're kidding. Nope. He stared at the pipe again. You thinking what I think you're thinking? I nodded slowly. Karen had dumped the entire neighborhood's storm water into my yard without checking the original drainage design, which meant she had accidentally activated the old emergency system. All it needed was one open valve. The next, Morning, the rain was still pouring when Karen stormed into my yard. She was furious. "What did you do?" she shouted. I was standing near the old control box behind my shed. "What do you mean?" I asked calmly. She pointed toward the hill. Water was rushing down the parking lot of the clubhouse, not flooding the neighborhood, flooding the HOA building itself. The overflow line had kicked in exactly how it was designed. Water entered my yard, then redirected through the old underground pipe and shot straight back uphill into the clubhouse drainage basin. Karen's mouth was hanging open. "You sabotaged our system." I shook my head. "No," I said calmly. "I fixed it." Right on cue, 2 county trucks pulled into the parking lot above us. Karen turned as 3 inspectors stepped out. One of them held a folder. He walked straight toward us. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "did you authorize a drainage system that redirects floodwater onto private property?" Karen stammered. "It was community protection." The inspector opened the folder. "You also installed it without a county permit." Her face went pale. "And," he added, "you damaged an existing county emergency drainage route." Jake quietly whispered beside me. "Oh, man." The inspector looked at the flooded clubhouse parking lot, then back at Karen. "You're looking at multiple violations." Karen looked like she might faint. That was the moment she realized something. Hadn't fought her. I had simply let her break the law. On camera. 3 weeks later, the HOA paid for every repair in my yard. They removed the pipe, rebuilt my fence, replanted my garden beds, and Karen, she was forced to resign as HOA president. The county also fined her personally for illegal construction. The best part happened about a month later. I saw Jake walking over laughing. "You hear the news?" "What news?" "The HOA voted to turn the clubhouse basement into a storm shelter." I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Jake grinned. "Because apparently, that place floods really easily." I looked up at the hill and smiled. Karen tried to drown my yard to protect the neighborhood. Instead, she flooded the one place she cared about most. And around here, people still repeat the same line whenever someone talks about HOA power. Never start a water fight with the guy who built the drainage system.